Hi, Satanico here once again from Godlovescomics, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. It's not a typical haul video. It's just a collection I'm calling Strange Ones, and it is a relatively random collection of number ones, mostly from the Bronze Age, that I have in my collection. And I thought it would be pretty interesting to just go through them. They're not all the number ones I have in my collection. I'm sure I have more. But it's a pretty good sampling of what I have. And there is nothing spectacular here. Don't expect me to pull out a slabbed Action Comics number one, or a slabbed Batman, or Fantastic Four, Avengers, anything like that. There's nothing spectacular, but and most of these comics are not really worth much at all. But aesthetically, sometimes they're worth a lot more to me than monetarily. So let's just take a look at what we have here. Okay, so the first issue is Superpowers number one, and that is from 1985. It's by, of course, the King, Jack King Kirby, who there was a lot of celebration of his 100th, what would have been his 100th birthday, just I believe last month, and a lot of incredible art shared, and some stories and photos of Kirby shared on the various Kirby groups on Facebook. And so this is not one of my favorite Kirby things. In fact, a lot of the stuff from the Bronze Age was really not peak Kirby. This is, I think, inked by Greg Theakston, and as you can see, colors are pretty bright. And some of this sort of played off of the Hunger Dogs original graphic novel, which I also have that as well. And that's on really nice Baxter paper, I guess, or glossy white paper, I should say. But once again, the colors are pretty garish. This is not as bad as I remember it. But, and there's Martian Manhunter, if you can see him up at the top there. But not the best example of Kirby's artwork, and not even the best example of his Dark Side, or, you know, the New Gods, Fourth World stuff. But it's an interesting little side note. Okay, and this is not a Bronze Age copy. In fact, this is Giant Size Ecstatics number one. And what's kind of funny about that is $2.99. It says 30 big pages, and 30 big pages, I guess, qualifies as giant size these days. And I remember giant size when they were 48 pages, but granted, you know, I have like giant size Defenders number one, and it was 48 pages, but I remember it having a Gil Kane cover, which was fantastic. And then it had, I think, mostly reprints, and it would have like a 2 or 3 page framing sequence that was original, that was done by Jim Starlin, and the art for that was amazing. And there was some kind of crazy, like, Silver Surfer battle with Quasimodo, and various stuff like that, that was kind of pulled from some old Lee Buscema stuff. But, so in that respect, I mean, 30 pages of original art, and particularly original art by Mike Allred, is certainly worth it. And I just like Mike Allred a lot. I mean, he's an amazingly talented and fun artist who has certainly a very retro style. It's a very clean, sort of deceptively simple style. I mean, it seems simple, but there's nothing simple about it. It's just really pure, beautiful cartooning that you imagine he was somewhat influenced by C.C. Beck, who used to do Shazam. But I haven't really read any or heard any interviews with Mike Allred, so I'm not sure his various influences. And by the way, this was also written by Peter Milligan, incredibly underrated writer. Peter Milligan, one of the British, sort of a second wave of British writers, and really overshadowed, along with Jamie Delano, by people like, of course, Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison, and even someone like Mark Millar, who I consider, you know, pretty inferior to someone like Milligan or Jamie Delano. Jamie Delano did Hellblazer and 2020 Visions with Frank Quitely. And Milligan has done so many other things, you know, a lot of Vertigo stuff. But he started doing the ecstatic stuff with Mike Allred, and the dialogue, the plotting, everything is so clever, so funny. It really crackles when he's writing it. And, of course, Mike Allred, brilliant artist. So that's, but that's probably an anomaly. My glasses just dropped. There you go, Tales of the Green Lantern #1. And that is a Brian Boland cover, so always going to get good work out of Brian Boland. For those who may be less than familiar with Boland's work, he's probably best known for illustrating The Killing Joke, with which was also written by Alan Moore, and it's become quite an expensive comic. Kind of sad. I had a first printing of The Killing Joke, which I bought off of the bought at the newsstands, and it was pretty much destroyed in a hurricane many years ago. I think I still have it, but the back cover was pretty much saturated and kind of torn off or whatever. It's probably warped. Certainly, it's not really even a reading copy. Okay, and this is The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones, and that's actually a really nice copy. It's got a cover by Terry Austin, who of course is best known as the inker on the Uncanny X-Men, the classic sort of version, even though Terry Austin's done a lot of other great stuff. But this was a comic that was just begging for John Byrne art. I mean, it just seemed perfect for John Byrne, which is kind of strange that John Byrne didn't do the cover. He did do the interior art of this, I do believe, and I believe he's inked by Austin. And he did like a really great sort of a promo full-page ad for it leading up to this. But he seemed to only do a couple of issues, and then people like Howard Chaykin took over, and not really Chaykin's best work. Not really too suited for this either. Chaykin did some really great stuff when he was doing his own thing for American Flag and for Black Hawk. Is it Black Hawk? I think so. But not really good. It really kind of went down the tubes. And Byrne, I guess, had too many other commitments. I mean, he's a guy who was sometimes doing 2 or 3 different comics at the same time, where he was fully writing and illustrating them, so it's pretty extraordinary. And this is New Mutants Special Edition #1, and that has a wraparound cover by Arthur Adams. You can pretty much see all the incredible detail that Arthur Adams is known for, but the thing about this issue is it's probably about $1 comic. You can find this in a $1 bin, or maybe for $1.50, $2. I mean, the cover price was $1.50 when it came out in 1985. So it's actually kind of sad, because I've looked through this issue recently. I scanned some pages and posted them on Facebook, and the amount of work that Arthur Adams put into this. And by the way, that says all new 64 pages. We just looked at a 34 page that was calling itself, a 30 page that was calling itself a giant size issue. This is 64 pages of insanely detailed Arthur Adams artwork. I mean, you can tell by the cover, just this guy's arm. Look at the hair on his arm. Look at the, sort of stippling of texturing on this guy's head. Look at the way he draws Warlock, which is always insane. It is just amazing how much effort Arthur Adams put into this book, and you would think, considering how popular he was and how influential he was, particularly on the image artists like McFarlane, Liefeld, who, regardless of what you think of their work, were enormously popular. You would think that Arthur Adams would be, tremendously collectible. I have no doubt that his original artwork is, but as I said, you can pick this book up for $2, $1, brand, probably a near mint. And this is Miss Mystic, and #1, and this is the origin issue and is by the great Neal Adams, but this was pretty disappointing when it came out. I don't think fans were excited about it. I definitely wasn't excited. It was finally a chance. Neal Adams was kind of a little bit before my time, but he was always a hugely collectible and acclaimed artist, and so I remember being incredibly excited that he was going to do a new series, and it was actually available and, you know, affordable. You could just buy it for $1 on the stands, and it wasn't, you know, this expensive collectible back issue. And then it turned out to be kind of a dud. But I've looked at it, I just looked at it just before I started this video, and art was much, much better than I remember. I wasn't too excited when it came out with this sort of Zipatone approach he took to creating Miss Mystic, if you can see what I'm talking about. But in retrospect, the art was much better than I remember. Let's see if I can find some nice pages, but you know. Some pretty nice artwork. And on the back you get Jack Kirby's Silver Star, which is also not one of Kirby's high water moments, working for Pacific Comics, which was a new independent comic publisher that came out sort of to compete with Marvel and DC, and they took away a lot of the major artists at the time, including Kirby, of course, the biggest name of all. But as we see, Neal Adams and Frank Bruner did a comic book called Warped. I believe it was Frank Bruner, or Warp. And then I believe Michael Kaluta and Mike Grell did one called John Sable Freelance. But none of these comics were really as good as their work for Marvel or DC. And perhaps that is just attributed to the fact that the characters that Marvel and DC have are so iconic. I'm not really sure, but anyway, that was something that they tried, and Pacific, of course, eventually went under relatively soon, but they did for a time take away the most popular artist from some of the mainstream comics publishers, much like Image had done. Image, the creators went and founded their own, and somehow that took off, but it didn't really work out for Pacific. And by the way, that comic, let's see, the Miss Mystic, again, that's something you can pick up for maybe $2, which is pretty amazing considering it's Neal Adams, but it just goes to show that it's a character that no one really cares about, because if you look at some of Neal Adams' past work, particularly on like Detective Comics, Man-Bat, Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, the covers on those are extraordinary at times, and those are highly collectible. So, and this is Battlestar Galactica #1. I bought it probably just because it was a #1. I really never cared for the series. It was you always wanted that series to be better, and it really sucked. It was really stupid. And of course, when you say that, there are people now who worship everything. So there's somebody who loves everything. You can't say, you could think of the worst television show in history, and there's someone who there's not even someone. There's a group of people who worship it, think of it fondly, in retrospect, and forget how bad it was initially, or maybe they're just not that bright. I'm not sure, but Battlestar Galactica, I mean, you just wanted your science fiction to be better than this, and of course the effects were not very good either. The comic was not good either. This is a Dave Cockrum and Bob McLeod cover. It's okay. It doesn't really grab me, especially when these are sort of the focal points of the composition. You look at the people down below, it's pretty well drawn, but not a particularly interesting comic. But supposedly sells for somewhere between $15 and $20. So, that's surprising because this comic, as far as I've had it, has always been worth about $1, maybe 50 cents. So, if people are paying that for it now, obviously, eventually a new series came out that was actually really highly praised. I never really got into the new series either, to be honest. And this is ManThing. This is the second volume of ManThing. Again, never really took off. Not a character that really's fit for carrying his own book, even though if you look at Swamp Thing, and ManThing is certainly Marvel's version of Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing did carry his own book, but he had some pretty incredible creators. And obviously when Alan Moore came on board, Steve Bissette, Rick Veitch, you just had some incredibly devoted creators who were able to do something incredible with a secondary character. And obviously Byrne Wrightson was there before them, another just unbelievably talented and devoted artist. So that was what separated Swamp Thing. ManThing had some good artist work on him when he was in like Marvel Team Up, when he was working with, when John Byrne was drawing him sometimes. But this was covered by Bob Wiacek, and then the interior art is by Jim Mooney, and it's actually not bad, and inked by Wiacek again. Again, it's a comic that it doesn't jump out at you. I don't remember being particularly impressed by it at all. It's another comic I'm sure I bought because it was the #1. But looking back at it, the art is better than I remember it again. And Jim Mooney was a guy who worked on Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man, Moon Knight, and certainly a lot of other stuff, and probably a lot of other stuff before I ever became aware of him. And this is Hercules, #1 from a limited series, and this was a really fun series. This was completely drawn by Bob Layton, who was probably best known for doing Iron Man, but he was an inker on several things. He would ink, I think, Avengers. He did just an enormous amount of stuff for Marvel. And but he really seemed to take off with this series on Hercules, where it was meant to be of a lot more of a comedic take than was typical in Marvel at the time. And you can see he put an enormous amount of work into the art. And it says conceived and executed by Bob Layton, writer and artist. And then so it's pretty much a one-man show. And this was either a 3 or 4 issue miniseries, and I didn't get all of the issues, I don't think, but I remember it being extremely entertaining. I actually really liked the character of Hercules. He appeared frequently in the Lee Kirby Thor issues, and Layton did a great job with him. It was a lot of fun. This was a funny issue. It was extremely well drawn, and again, a comic that's you could probably pick it up anywhere for $1. I'm sure you can pick it up on eBay for $1, which is sometimes sad when you think about how much work went into these and then how disposable sometimes they are. But that's just the nature of collecting and the nature of comics and the medium, unfortunately. And this is the World of Krypton. Again, another mini-series, first of 4 issues. I'm probably cheating a little bit with #1s that are just mini-series. This is by John Byrne and Mike Mignola and Rick Bryant. And I believe this is a Byrne cover, but then the interior art is by Mignola and Bryant, I believe. And it absolutely has some beautiful artwork from Mike Mignola. Best known, of course, for creating Hellboy. But this actually has a really nice sort of airy style. It's not quite as heavily inked as his stuff with Hellboy, but it's still very distinctive as Mignola. It's not like some of these artists. Bill Sienkiewicz was one who, or Walt Simonson, before they were kind of allowed to be themselves, their stuff was pretty pedestrian and you couldn't really see the brilliance. until they were sort of set free. But in Mignola's case, you can sort of see that it looks like Mignola's work, even in the early stages of his career. He was still just idiosyncratic enough. This is Dreadstar #1 by Jim Starlin. I mentioned just before, this again was a disappointment for me. Not that it's bad. Artistically, I was less impressed. I expected all of the detail of Starlin's Warlock. Starlin did some amazing stuff, and then he did some stuff that was less than amazing. And I was never too impressed by Dreadstar. A lot of people remember it fondly, and it is probably, this #1 issue is probably worth about $4 or $5. I do see some people who slab their copies, they're 9.8s, and they're trying to sell them for $80 or $100, and good luck for that. But this is my copy's in really nice shape. I don't know, I'd say probably a 9.2, 9.4, but and it's, the artwork is decent, but I don't think it really compares to Starlin's work on Warlock. And but it was one of the first in the Epic Comics line, as you can see there. If you can see, the Epic was sort of the line that Archie Goodwin, I believe Archie Goodwin was the editor, and it was more of a creator-owned line. So it allowed these superstar creators to have some freedom to create their own stuff and not feel like they were working in the farm system of Marvel for once. And I believe it was kind of forced by Warren Comics, and more likely by DC paying some better royalties than Marvel, that kind of forced their hand with Epic. This is probably my favorite so far. X-Men and New Teen Titans, Marvel presents, Marvel and DC present, and a fantastic cover by Walt Simonson and Terry Austin. It's not too often that you would see Walt Simonson doing, this was a time when John Byrne and Terry Austin pretty much owned the X-Men, and Chris Claremont just had like an iron fist over the X-Men, where he was not allowing anyone else to write it. It was his universe, and he really controlled it. So he wrote this. Walt Simonson did some really sensational art, great cover, and this was a big event at the time, because Marvel and DC did not cross over. Now apparently DC does crossovers with Elmer Fudd and Power Rangers and Teen Titans, not Teen Titans, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I'm sure they've crossed over with Marvel on a few occasions since then. In fact, I'm sure they have. But this was a rare occasion. This was maybe the first time, I'm not sure. But this was Marvel's biggest property, Uncanny X-Men. And New Teen Titans was essentially DC's big team book that was drawn by George Perez. So it was a pretty big crossover and pretty exciting. You can see Dark Phoenix. I think, and it's been 100 years since I read this book, but this is Dark Phoenix, Darkseid, and Deathstroke versus the New Teen Titans and the Uncanny X-Men of that period. So but yeah, really good. It's got a wraparound cover, and that comic sells for, I've seen it actually on Amazon for $40 to $50 for what they say is a new copy. And then I've seen it on my comic shop for $20, which means that you could probably find it on eBay for about $5. So once again, probably undervalued in a sense. This is the New Teen Titans #1. I mean, the New Mutants #1. And that is a cover by, is that Bob McLeod, I believe? Yes. And Bob McLeod also did the interior art with Mike Gustovich. And it was written by Oh, this was when Claremont was writing the New Mutants as well. But this was a perfectly mediocre comic. I bought it again because it was #1, and this is not the New Mutants that would eventually emerge when Bill Sienkiewicz took over. That was when the New Mutants became a memorable comic, and not terribly valuable. This one's not valuable at all. It's probably, once again, a few bucks, but some of the later issues, there's particularly the one where, I guess, Legion, which is now a popular Netflix show, not Netflix, network show on Fox, I guess. That one's of some value, maybe 30 bucks or something, but this comic was 1 through 17 was primarily drawn by Sal Buscema. And at some point, Marvel's editorial decided, look, this is their sort of, the book wasn't selling well, perhaps, and Marvel decided, look, this is sort of our hot young teen mutant group, and mutants, everything with the mutants should be selling, gangbusters, and Sal Buscema's too old-fashioned. And so they took Sal Buscema off the book, and according to Louise Simonson, who was the editor, when she told Sal that he was too old-fashioned to be on the book, apparently Sal was so angry that number 17, which I guess was his last book, was some of the best art that he had ever done at Marvel, according to Louise Simonson in Sean Howe's book about Untold Tales, Marvel's Untold Tales or Behind the Scenes or whatever. So, and then after that, Sienkiewicz took over with issue number 18, and the covers were mostly done by other people, Tom Mandrake, June Brigman. As you can see, this is by Bob McLeod. So it wasn't Sal's fault as regards the covers, but if you think about it, the covers, if you just look at that series and look it up online, and you see how the covers change from 1 through 17, conventional looking, drawn, very competent Marvel covers, and from 18, as long as Bill Sienkiewicz was on the book, the most extraordinary, bizarre, unique, fine art covers that you could imagine in comics at the time. Completely just unique and original and unusual for that time period, and just a shocking change. And I don't think there was anything that was quite like the run of covers by Sienkiewicz until Dave McKean came out with his Sandman covers, which were very Photoshoppy at a point where Photoshop was still very new software. And then that Photoshop collage sort of technique that McKean used significantly on Sandman, especially the earlier issues, started to just get ripped off by everyone within a couple of years, apparently after they learned Photoshop and figured out some of his techniques. Okay, this is a really nice comic to have. Peter Parker, Spectacular Spider-Man #1. I remember loving this series when it came out. And I actually really enjoyed this series for probably the first 30 issues or so. And it was mostly drawn by Sal Buscema, and who was perfectly competent at telling a story. He wasn't the most spectacular artist. He wasn't as good as his brother John, but he was very competent. The problem I have with this, I liked the cover when I bought it. I've always liked the cover, but this cover is pretty much a swipe of Amazing Spider-Man number 134. Look it up, which was done by the great John Romita Sr., and while the figures, Sal Buscema changed some of the figures. There were cops down here and the Amazing Spider-Man issue and some stuff over here. The main central figures of the tarantula, that's the exact same pose and pretty much the same pose of Spider-Man. And even the yellow background behind the logo was, it's exactly the same as Amazing Spider-Man 134. So it's pretty much a swipe, and I don't know. That's okay, I guess. John Romita Sr. was actually the art director at Marvel for a long time. I'm not sure if he was at this point, but so he must have approved of Sal swiping his work. And not really sure how much that goes for, but this is not a great copy. It's this was a comic that I really read and really loved, and so it's got a little bit of spine rolling, a lot of stress along the spine. It's got a little bit of a bend here, a little bit of a bend in the corner, and it actually looks a lot nicer in the bag. Out of the bag, it's a little bit rougher, but it's probably a very good. Okay, and there's Alpha Flight number 1. And as I said, these are not spectacular comics by any stretch of the imagination in terms of number 1s. You can find Alpha Flight number 1 almost anywhere, and very cheaply. It's not an expensive comic, even though it was drawn by John Byrne at a point when Byrne was still extremely hot. It was kind of a Byrne getting his own title. He was kind of given free rein to do whatever he wanted at Marvel because he was their absolute superstar along with George Perez. And so he was Canadian. He got his own Canadian super team. But as written by him and drawn a little bit more loosely by him, I don't think Terry Austin inked these for very long. He may have inked this one. You can see he even had a sort of a hairy midget character that was similar to the Wolverine. And so Alpha Flight, no pun intended, never really took off. It still had a pretty long run. Byrne's art, in retrospect, looking back at it, was a lot more detailed than I remembered it at the time. And but even this cover, it's just not as dramatic as any of the X-Men covers that Byrne was doing at the high point of Claremont, Byrne, and Austin, and those issues in the 120s, 130s, up to 140s in the days of Future Past. You know, the yellow background, everything. But I guess what's interesting about Alpha Flight was that this character, North Star, kind of became a cause celebre with Marvel when it was revealed that he was gay. That was a big issue in 1992. And then in 2012, apparently he made some more headlines. Marvel made more headlines by marrying him to his longtime partner, Kyle. This was after New York had just passed legalized same-sex marriage. So it seemed topical for Marvel. Marvel was doing a lot of sort of their, not really controversial, but their little attempts at getting attention, particularly Axel Alonso, the Marvel editor, where they have continued to do stuff like making Thor female and, you know, a black Captain America and a Hispanic Spider-Man, all of these sort of diversification things. So this was a big one where North Star apparently married his partner. And I think what's interesting about that, I wasn't reading these comics at all at this point, and so I certainly didn't see any of that. But it was written by Marjorie Liu, who is the co-creator of the wildly critically acclaimed Monstrous, which probably a lot of people have heard of by now. And I might get around to reviewing the first volume, which I purchased. I read a little bit of it, got bored, put it down. So I would like to review it, just to be perhaps a dissenting voice from all the critics who adore it. But I wouldn't judge it until I finish reading it. Devil Dinosaur number 1. And that is Jack Kirby again. And with Mike Royer, who a lot of people feel like was one of Kirby's better inkers. Most people, you know, there seems to be more of a consensus for Joe Sinnott. I mean, how could you not love Joe Sinnott's work? But I've seen a lot of people in the Kirby groups on Facebook who advocate Royer and feel like Sinnott, as great as he was almost a little too clean, or, you know, changed Kirby's line work a little bit too much. I always thought Royer was a bit sort of brutish and, you know, a little bit less obviously skilled, which Kirby sort of has a brutish physical style already. So it just looked like it lacked a little bit of finesse. But in retrospect, I mean, it's hard to complain. It's still Kirby artwork. The problem is that Devil Dinosaur, from my perspective, was the nadir, or pretty much the end of Kirby at this point, where he had come out with sort of the prior wave of Marvel, books when he returned to Marvel with Eternals and Black Panther, which the artwork for those books is still spectacular. It's probably not to the level of his incredible Fantastic Four run or his incredible, Silver Age Thors, but it's still, there's some unbelievably spectacular double-age spreads and, inventive sort of illustrations and compositions and everything else. So Devil Dinosaur was a little bit disappointing in that respect. And this is a book that you can get, again, probably $5 on eBay, which is kind of sad. I mean, it's Jack Kirby. It's from 1978 and still pretty easily found commodity. And this is Mr. Miracle #1. Or I'm sorry, man, I'm messing up all of these titles. Miracle Man #1. I believe was actually called Marvel Man at one point, but Marvel had trouble with that. But of course, and now of course Marvel actually owns the property, I believe, and re-released all of these in graphic novel form. But this was done by Alan Moore and Gary Leach, and was probably Alan Moore's greatest work before he came to the United States, prior to Watchmen. It probably is on the level of Watchmen and is spectacular in its own fashion and shocking and really fascinating and a real unique take on the superhero idiom. So certainly worth reading, and if you can find them all. And that's probably #1. It's probably a $10 book, and this is in excellent condition. It's probably about a $10 book. And this is Warlord, getting down almost to the last 3 issues. This is Warlord #1 by Mike Grell. And Mike Grell did pretty much everything on Warlord. He did something like the first 40, 50 issues where he was writing it, illustrating it. Sometimes you could see where he took some shortcuts, but and he got criticized for anatomy. See, that's kind of a funny skinny thigh there, but his artwork could be pretty impressive, and there was a vigor to it, and he had done some really nice stuff, particularly with, I think, Green Arrow, but he also did some Batman stuff and a lot of stuff for DC. And then Warlord was kind of his own book, his own special thing, where they just kind of let him run wild. And it was interesting enough. I liked the sort of setting. It was mostly in the jungle. It's kind of a Tarzan with swords, and I just liked sort of the milieu of Warlord. So I remember buying all of those copies up until Grell left the book and Dan Jurgens took it over, which is never a good sign. So, and this is probably, again, this is actually #1. You can see for around $10 to $15, and probably near mint or very fine. And then after that, it just tails off incredibly. You can, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Most of those are a couple of bucks each at the most. For whatever reason, again, just not a major character that ever really accrued value. Now, if Netflix ever comes out with a Warlord, TV series, which seems pretty unlikely because it would require shooting on not offsets. It would require, shooting on location. And I think Netflix obviously is pretty cheap, and they like to shoot everything on really dark sets. So pretty unlikely. But if somebody decides to make this into a TV series, then suddenly you'll see it shoot up, which is pretty unfortunate. But as I said, movies and television seem to drive the collector's market. And one more Kirby. Actually, surprisingly, had 3 Kirbys in this one small little batch. But this is Machine Man, and I like this cover a little bit more than the Devil Dinosaur. But I consider Devil Dinosaur and Machine Man pretty much they came out at the same time, and this was all Kirby and Royer once again. And this is a point where Kirby was living in California. He wasn't anywhere near the Marvel offices. They actually had a California address for the letters page. And there's some fun moments in Machine Man, but it just wasn't. I wasn't too terribly impressed by it at the time. And looking back at it, it certainly has its fun moments. It certainly has some moments of Kirby majesty, but he was on a downswing here as far as I'm concerned, especially, as I said, compared to Black Panther and Eternals. And then prior to those, the DC Fourth World stuff, in terms of artistically, this was not his best stuff. It was near sort of the end of his career, as we saw. Even that Pacific Comics series they did, Silver Star, right there, sort of, again, not the best that Jack had to offer by far, but still pretty interesting series. I've seen this for $50 in near mint, and this character was actually created in 2001 Space Odyssey, which Kirby followed the Stanley Kubrick storyline pretty faithfully, I think, initially, and then as the series went on, he just started creating his own stuff. Machine Man actually reminds me a lot of the Recorder, which was a character that appeared pretty often in some of the Lee Kirby Thors. Not terribly different, so at least in terms of design. In terms of personality, actually, a Recorder, I think, was a little more interesting of a character, but Stan Lee was writing it, so. But anyway, it's this copy. Sadly, it looks great in the bag, and probably I think it looks great on camera, but has a little bit of foxing or a little bit of oxidization, and then there was some damage, a little bit of crumpling down at the bottom. It's really unfortunate. I don't think I had it bagged for a long time, and that let it do some damage to it that should not have been there, because otherwise there's not much reader damage at all. There's no spine ticks or anything particular. Okay, and last but not least, sorry if I've rambled too long as usual. This is The Big Splash, John Byrne's XMen, and I bought this, I'm almost positive, because it was John Byrne, and had no idea who this guy was, Mike Mignola at the time, and or what this character was. I like the cover, looking at it now, but interior, I wasn't a big fan of. I'm not a noir fan, which is indicative of Frank Miller's Sin City, which was a lot of Mickey Spillane sort of noir, and Hellboy has that look as well. I really enjoyed the Hellboy movie, though. That kind of made me enjoy the character a lot more than I initially had in comics. I really paid too much attention to him in comics. But I purchased this for John Byrne. But XMen, again, sort of John Byrne's own thing. Obviously a little bit of a take on XMen that he was able to do under the Legend imprint at Dark Horse. Frank Miller, I think, had the same deal. And but XMen's not that interesting, to be honest, and art-wise not that spectacular. And as it turns out, this was valuable because it was the first color appearance of Hellboy. So I just kind of got lucky with that one, because That's probably one of the only 2 or 3 issues of X-Men I ever bought or ever read, so just got really lucky purchasing this. And I may have purchased it as a back issue, but right after it came out, maybe for a couple of bucks. So apparently it's his first color appearance. A lot of people compared Mike Mignola to Kirby. I never really got that. I never saw Kirby use shadow and this much ink on his pages and everything in the shadows and everything else. I think it was almost always because Hellboy had sort of just a big ham fist, and Kirby, of course, was known for that, and that seems to be the primary influence to me. And the difference is that Hellboy had the big hands. Those were actually part of the character. His character, he's a big person, a big creature, and who has big hands. Kirby would draw those size hands on Sue Storm or Big Barda. I mean, Kirby, those are hands that Kirby put on everybody. So everybody had some big mittens on them when it was Jack Kirby drawing, which is kind of cool and funny as well. But this comic is actually seen some crazy ones where some people had them slabbed and were trying to sell it for $400 on probably on My Comic Shop, and then I've seen it for $80 slabbed, and then I've seen raw copies going for about $40 to $60 in eBay auctions. So and this is a really nice copy. It's got a little tick in the corner here, and little spine tick there, a little spine tick down here, and that's it. Really nice sharp corners everywhere else. No other damage that I can see. So I don't know, 9.4, 9.6, but yeah, so that's just about it. These are, as I said, strange ones. There's nothing spectacular in here. Not going to blow anybody away. It's more about the art and the artist, and in this case, most of these are comics that I didn't really like that much. There are a few of them that I enjoyed. I mean, I liked them for what they were, but I mean, there's clearly some that I just bought as a comics collector because they were number ones, and that didn't really work out too well. So, but anyway, this is that's Strange Ones, and hope you enjoyed it. And I may be back with some more number ones if I dredge them up, but more likely I'll be back with another haul and also some other random comics in the future. So thanks for watching, and by all means, like, comment, and subscribe, because it's lonely out there. Thanks a lot. Bye.